Hello, this is Amina, and this is my culminating task final. For this task, we were supposed to choose an extinct species and bring it back using biotechnology. The species that I chose are the great auks, and the inquiry question for this project was, to what extent should humans manipulate the genetics of species to preserve species diversity? First, I'd like to talk about the great auks. The great auks became extinct in the year of 1844. Their scientific name is Penguinus impennis. They are 75 centimeters high and weigh 5 kilograms. They ranged across the Atlantic from northern Europe to Iceland, Canada, and the eastern United States. This picture kind of shows their habitat range in Northern America. They also lived mainly in the open ocean, however, they also went on shore to breed. They look very similar to a penguin, and they are also flightless. It had a black back and a head, a white front, and a large white spot between the bill and eye. So this is kind of how they looked like. Like they were very good swimmers, just like penguins are, and they also went on land a lot, but they could not fly, which was one of their vulnerabilities, which caused their extinction, and I'm going to talk about how they became extinct a bit later. But in general, the great auks were a unique species and provided biodiversity and variation within the ecosystems, for example, the Atlantic one. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about how the great auks became extinct. As we know, they became extinct in 1844, and they were definitely an overspecialized species. The great auks went extinct for two different reasons, but one more than the other. They became extinct mostly because of human impact, but the Little Ice Age had a small impact on their extinction as well. So firstly, human impact. Humans were really the main cause of their extinction. It was caused by overhunting during the early 1800s. The great auk was wanted for more than just its meat. It was also killed for its feathers, fat, oil, and eggs. There were some conservation attempts, although they were clearly not good enough. A petition was drafted in 1775 when the Nova Scotian government asked the Parliament of Great Britain to ban the killing of auks, or else they would be beaten in public. However, the fishermen were still allowed to kill the auks if their meat was used as bait. They were so overspecialized that when the birds became endangered, collectors were willing to pay as much as $16, which is equivalent to nearly a year's wage of an experienced worker at the time, for one single specimen. The Little Ice Age had a very small impact on their extinction, but it may have reduced the population of the great auk by exposing more of their breeding islands to predation by polar bears. But massive exploitation for their down drastically reduced the population. However, when we bring these species back, both of these factors will not impact their population. For example, the Little Ice Age will not impact them when we bring them back now, because we will bring them back to a place where there are no predators at the beginning. And for example, right now, the scientists are trying to bring them back to the foreign islands, where there are a bunch of razorbills and a bunch of puffins, and there are no predators, and it's a good breeding place for them. But then after we breed a good amount of great auks, then we will think about bringing them back to their original habitats like the Atlantic, Iceland, and other places. Humans will also not impact the great auks when we bring them back now, because people no longer harvest wild seabirds North Atlantic for meat or other products commercially. So this means that they would be in less pressure than they were 200 years ago. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about their niche, which is their role in their ecosystem. So first I'm going to be talking about their niche in the past ecosystem, which was before the 1800s. So their main food source was fish between 12 and 20 centimeters, like their favorite Atlantic menhaden and capelin. They had a few natural predators, such as the orca, white-tailed eagles, polar bears, which were mainly large marine mammals. The striking black and white bird's flightlessness made it vulnerable to humans eager to exploit its meat and feathers. So their flightlessness were basically one of the reasons why they became extinct. They bred on offshore rocky islands, sloped near the sea, and foraged in small groups. They would migrate from colonies to southern regions in late fall and winter after breeding and returned in early spring. They laid only one egg each year, usually hatching in June. Their biome, or their major habitats, were rock and ice, the intertidal zone, and the oceanic pelagic zone. Their climate zone was cold and polar or tundra. So now I'm going to talk about what their niche would be in our current ecosystem and why this is important. It's one of the very few flightless birds of the northern hemisphere, and it obviously played a very important part in the ecosystem of the North Atlantic. Evidently, the great auk had a huge range of habitat, but we should try to reintroduce it into a highly protected area that is still cold or tundra, with rock, ice, and sea. Scientists have found the exact location to reintroduce them to, the Farne Islands in northern England, which will be a great place for breeding. It is also home to the auk's cousins and closest living relative, the razorbills. The Atlantic puffins live there and are also another species threatened by human activity. Their niche will be very similar to their original niche, but there will be no hunting at all, and there will be very less predators. The great auks will also have no impact on the food chain because there are plenty of producers, primary consumers, and there are not many predators. The abiotic factors that mainly impact them are the temperatures. Because of climate change, the temperatures have evidently become warmer because of climate change from the 1800s and now. But because the great auks are very good at adapting, they will be fine when we reintroduce them into their new habitats. So in the end, it is very important to bring back the great auks to our world. They provided biodiversity and variation because the razorbill is the only living species of the auks. They also had a very important role in the Atlantic ecosystem and probably in the other ecosystems they were a part of. So now I'm going to be talking about the great auk's common living ancestor on this world right now. This is important because it will help me bring back the great auks using biotechnology. So the great auk's common living ancestor currently is the razorbill. First, I compared both of their classifications. So they're of course both of the Animalia kingdom. Their phylums are both Chordata. They're both part of the Aves class. Both of their orders are Chaerodriformes. They're both part of the Alcidae family, but they're both part of different genuses. The great auk is part of the Penguinus genus, and the razorbill is part of the Alca genus. And of course their species names are different. The great auk is part of the Penguinus impennis species, and the razorbill is part of the Alca torta species. Then I looked at a cladogram. A cladogram is used to represent relationships between groups of animals, and they're used by scientists studying phylogenetic systematics. So over here is the Alcatorda, which is the razorbills, and over here is the Pinguinus impennis, which is the great auk. And the Alcatorda is the closest living relative to the Pinguinus impennis. And unfortunately, a lot of these species are extinct right now, which is why it is important to bring back the great auks. Then I made a comparison chart based on their behavior and habitat. So the great auk and the razorbill are kind of part of the same habitat range. They're both in the transatlantic range, and they kind of are on rocky coasts and rocky cliffs, and they also swim in the open ocean. One big difference between them, though, is that the great auk is flightless, but the razorbill is actually an agile flyer. So that is one gene that I'm going to need to alter, and I'll talk about how we can alter these distinct genes to create and bring back the great auk. They both have the same feeding habits, prey, and predators. The great auk and the razorbill also looked quite similar. The great auk had a black back and head, a white front, and a large white spot between the bill and eye. The razorbill has white underparts and a black head, neck, back, and feet. Another big difference between the great auk and the razorbill is that the great auk was much bigger. The great auk was 75 centimeters tall, whereas the razorbill is 20 centimeters tall. The great auk has a 20 to 25 years lifespan, and the razorbill has only a 13 years lifespan. However, both of these species have the same mating habits. And as I said before, I will talk about how we can alter these distinct genes like the flightless and the flyer and their sizes later on. Then I made some statements of similarity. So, of course, we know that the razorbill is their closest living relative. They have the same behavioral, feeding, and mating habits. They look very similar as well. They have the same habitat, but one major difference is that the razorbill can fly, whereas the great auk cannot. Tom Gilbert, an ancient DNA expert at the Center for Geogenetics, University of Copenhagen, reported on his preliminary sequencing of the great auk and razorbill genomes, confirming that they are genetically close. Genetic editing techniques can be used to genetically engineer the razorbill genome to resemble that of the great auk. Because of these findings, their DNA is quite similar. So now finally I'm going to be talking about the de-extinction process, so how I'm going to bring back the great auks using biotechnology. So I have some specific steps. So first, we have to extract the DNA from the preserved specimens of the great auks from 1844. Then we have to sequence the genome. So first of all, I'm just going to show a diagram that shows what DNA is and what chromosomes and etc. are. So there's a cell, and we have multiple cells in our body, and in the cell we have a nucleus, and in the nucleus we have chromosomes, and we have 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs, and there's parts of the chromosomes that are DNA. I also have a diagram here that shows what the genome is. So as we know that this is a cell, then this is the nucleus, and this is the genome. In the genome, there are the chromosomes, and then we have the DNA. The DNA is kind of like a twisted ladder, and the rungs represent the gene code. And from the gene code, we can break it down to alleles. So for example, the gene could be the eye color, but the allele would be the actual color. So for example, blue, or brown. So after we sequence the genome, we would find the distinct genes that differ the great auk from the razorbills. So we saw that in my comparison chart before, it was that the great auks were flightless, whereas the razorbills were agile flyers. So we would take their distinct genes, so their flightless genes, and edit those genes into the cells of a razorbill embryo. So the embryo is basically a part of an egg, which is part of the fertilization process. And I feel like the two distinct genes that we're going to have to add into the razorbill's embryo would be their flightless gene and their size gene. So they're way bigger than razorbills. Then we would take the razorbill embryo and implant it into a large bird. And the large bird should be large enough to bear the size of the egg. So probably something like a goose. And this process has also worked for many other species. And currently it is the most easy and efficient to bring back the great auks. So, for example, this process is already working for the woolly mammoth. Harvard scientists have already started editing important genes of the woolly mammoth in a living elephant cell line using this similar biotechnological process. They edited 16 genes governing 3 important traits, and probably for the great auks, there are 2 important traits that we're going to have to edit into the razorbill embryo, which is their flightlessness and their size. So then, I found that there were some potential challenges in this process. For example, all their distinct genes might not be in their specimens because it has been almost 200 years. There could also be a possible cell or embryo mutation of the razorbill. And also, the bird might not be large or big enough to lay the large great auk and razorbill egg. So those are the potential challenges in this process. Then I found the factors and implications of reintroducing the great auks. One environmental implication and consideration is climate change. One of the causes of their extinction is the Little Ice Age, which caused the polar bears to go into the great auks breeding territory. The great auks would also have to go through rising sea levels and overfishing if it is introduced to the North Atlantic coastal waters. Reintroducing a species also implies that there will be less human hunting in the area, which is a moral implication. Reintroducing the species implies that there will be more public viewing, more research, which is an economic benefit. And reintroducing the species also implies a cultural benefit because there will be more biodiversity and variation within the whole species. So in the end, we should definitely reintroduce them when we bring them back. It is going to help the ecosystem, and there will of course be more biodiversity and variation. There will also be no consequencing factors that caused them to become extinct in the first place. And these are my citations in APA format, and Thank you for listening to my proposal.